At 11:47 p.m., Lucas Hale's phone lights up with a name he hasn't seen in 4 years. The voice on the other end is barely recognizable, shaking, breaking apart. I didn't know who else to call. Ivy Carter is standing outside in the cold, locked out of a house that was never really hers, afraid of footsteps she can't see but knows are coming. Lucas doesn't hesitate. He grabs his keys, leaves his sleeping daughter with a neighbor, and drives into the night toward a woman he once cared about, unaware that answering this call will unravel everything he thought he understood about safety, control, and what it means to protect someone who's already survived the worst. If you're watching from across the country or around the world, drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it hits you somewhere real, hit that like button. Let's get into it. Lucas Hale had always been a light sleeper. It came with the territory. Single father, full-time job, kid who occasionally woke up thirsty or convinced there was a monster in the hallway. So when his phone buzzed on the nightstand at 11:47 p.m., he was already half awake, staring at the ceiling, running through tomorrow's to-do list in his head. He reached for it without looking, expecting a work email or a spam call, but the name on the screen stopped him cold. Ivy Carter. He sat up, blinking hard, like maybe he'd misread it, but no. There it was. A name he hadn't seen in years. A name that belonged to a different version of his life, back when he still went to parties and stayed out late and didn't have a 6-year-old asleep down the hall. He answered. Hello. For a second, there was nothing, just the faint hiss of static and the muffled sound of wind. Then her voice came through, thin and unsteady. Lucas? Yeah. Ivy? I'm sorry. I know it's late. I didn't know who else to call. She sounded wrong, not just upset, fractured, like she was holding herself together with both hands and losing the grip. What's going on? Lucas swung his legs out of bed, already reaching for his jeans. Where are you? She stopped, and he heard her breath catch. I'm outside. I don't have my keys. I can't get in. Outside where? The house, his house. Lucas, I can't go back in there. He didn't know whose house she meant. Didn't know what had happened or why she was calling him after all this time, but the fear in her voice was real, and that was enough. Stay there, he said. I'm coming. You don't have to. I'm already dressed. Send me the address. She did. He pulled on a shirt, shoved his feet into sneakers, and grabbed his wallet and keys. His daughter, Emma, was asleep in her room, curled up under a blanket covered in cartoon dinosaurs. He stood in her doorway for a second, watching her breathe, then texted his neighbor, a retired teacher named Mrs. Alvarez, who'd helped him out more times than he could count. Emergency. Need you to watch Emma for an hour. She's asleep. I'll explain tomorrow. Mrs. Alvarez replied in under a minute. On my way. By the time she knocked softly on the door, Lucas was already in his jacket, keys in hand. She didn't ask questions, just nodded, squeezed his arm, and walked inside. He murmured a thank you and left. The drive took 20 minutes. The address Ivy had sent was in a part of town Lucas didn't visit often. Wide streets, tall gates, houses set back behind hedges and wrought iron. Old money, or at least the appearance of it. He pulled up to the curb and killed the engine. There she was, sitting on the edge of the sidewalk, knees pulled up to her chest, arms wrapped around herself. She wasn't wearing a coat, just a thin sweater and jeans, her hair loose and tangled around her face. The streetlight above her cast everything in cold yellow. Lucas got out of the car and walked over slowly, like approaching something wounded. Ivy. She looked up, and the expression on her face hit him harder than he expected. Relief? Yes, but also shame. Like she'd done something wrong just by calling him. You came, she said quietly. Of course I came. He crouched down beside her, keeping his voice steady. You okay? Are you hurt? She shook her head quickly, but her hands were trembling. I'm fine. I couldn't stay in there. I couldn't. In the house? Yeah. Is someone in there now? No, he's gone. He left hours ago, but I can't. Her voice cracked, and she pressed her palms against her eyes. I can't go back in. I can't do it anymore. Lucas didn't push. He just waited, letting the silence stretch until she was ready. Finally, she lowered her hands and looked at him. Her eyes were red, exhausted. I don't have anywhere else to go. Then you're coming with me. Lucas, I can't just... You can. Come on. He stood and held out his hand. After a moment, she took it. She was lighter than he remembered, or maybe just hollowed out. He opened the passenger door and she climbed in without a word, pulling her knees up again, making herself small. Lucas got in the driver's seat and turned the heat on full blast. They didn't talk much on the way back. Ivy stared out the window, her breath fogging the glass. Once, she started to say something, "I'm sorry," but Lucas cut her off. "Don't!" She went quiet after that. When they got back to his apartment, Mrs. Alvarez was sitting on the couch with a book, reading, glasses perched on her nose. She looked up as they walked in, took one look at Ivy, and stood without a word. "She'll be fine," she said to Lucas, patting his shoulder on her way out. "Call if you need anything." The door clicked shut behind her. Lucas turned to Ivy, who was standing in the middle of his small living room like she didn't know what to do with her hands. "You hungry?" he asked. She shook her head. "When's the last time you ate?" She thought about it. "I don't know." "Okay, sit." She sat. Lucas went into the kitchen and made tea. Nothing fancy, just the kind that came in bags, and brought it over with a sleeve of crackers. She took the mug but didn't drink, just held it between her palms, letting the warmth seep in. Lucas sat across from her, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. He wanted to ask what had happened, who had done this to her, why she'd disappeared from his life in the first place. But she looked so tired, so brittle, that he kept his mouth shut. "Thank you," she said finally. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You don't have to thank me." "I do." "You didn't have to come, you didn't have to—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "I know it's been a long time." "Doesn't matter." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and something in her face softened. "You haven't changed." "Sure I have. I've got a kid now." That got a ghost of a smile. "I heard. Emma, right?" "Yeah, she's asleep. You'll meet her tomorrow." Ivy nodded, staring down into her tea. "I didn't know where else to go. Everyone else, they wouldn't understand. Or they'd tell me to just deal with it. Or they'd call him." "Who's him?" Her jaw tightened. "Doesn't matter." Lucas wanted to press, but he didn't. Not tonight. Instead, he stood and grabbed a blanket from the closet, tossing it onto the couch. "You can sleep here. Bathroom's down the hall. I'll be in my room if you need anything." She nodded again, pulling the blanket around herself like armor. Lucas turned to go, then stopped. "Ivy?" "Yeah?" "You're safe here, okay?" Her eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back and nodded. Lucas left her there and went to check on Emma. She was still asleep, oblivious, her little fist curled under her chin. He stood in the doorway for a long time, watching her breathe, trying to process what had just happened. Ivy Carter. 4 years. And now she was in his living room, shaking and afraid, looking like someone had taken a hammer to her life. He didn't know what he was walking into, but he knew he couldn't walk away. Yet, the next morning, Lucas woke to the smell of coffee. For a second, he thought he'd imagined it, then remembered. He pulled on a shirt and walked into the kitchen. Ivy was standing at the counter, staring at the coffee maker like it was a puzzle she couldn't solve. She was wearing the same clothes from last night, her hair pulled back in a messy knot. "Morning," Lucas said. She jumped a little, then turned. "Sorry, I didn't know if you'd mind. I couldn't sleep." "It's fine. Help yourself." She poured a cup, hands still shaking slightly. Lucas made himself one too and leaned against the counter, watching her. "Did you sleep at all?" he asked. "A little. Not really." "Nightmares?" She nodded. Before Lucas could say anything else, there was a soft patter of feet in the hallway. Emma appeared, rubbing her eyes, dragging her stuffed dinosaur by one leg. "Daddy?" "Hey, Bug, come here." She shuffled over, still half asleep, and climbed into his arms. Then she noticed Ivy and went still, staring. "Who's that?" "This is Ivy. She's an old friend. She's staying with us for a little while." Emma studied Ivy with the blunt curiosity of a 6-year-old. "Why?" "Because she needed help," Lucas said simply. Emma seemed to accept this. She wriggled out of Lucas's arms and walked over to Ivy, holding up her dinosaur. "This is Mr. Chomps." Ivy crouched down, meeting Emma at eye level. "He looks very important." "He is. He eats bad guys." "That's good. We need more of those." Emma grinned, and just like that, the tension in the room eased. Lucas watched them, something tight in his chest loosening just a little. Over breakfast, cereal for Emma, toast for the adults. Ivy stayed quiet, but she didn't look as haunted as she had the night before. Emma chattered about school, about her friend Mia, who could do a cartwheel, about the art project she was working on. Ivy listened, nodding in the right places, and Lucas saw something flicker in her expression. Not quite a smile, but close. After Emma went to brush her teeth, Ivy helped Lucas clear the table. "She's sweet," Ivy said. "Yeah, she's the best thing I ever did." Ivy paused, staring down at the plate in her hands. "You're a good dad." "I'm trying." "No, you are." She set the plate down and looked at him. "I mean it." Lucas didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. Later, after he'd dropped Emma off at school, he came back to find Ivy sitting on the couch, staring at her phone like it might explode. "You okay?" he asked. She looked up, startled. "He's been calling." "Who?" "Damien. My—" She stopped, exhaled slowly. "My ex. I guess. I don't even know what to call him." Lucas sat down across from her. "You don't have to answer." "I know, but he'll just keep calling, and if I don't answer, he'll—" She stopped again, shaking her head. "Never mind." "He'll what?" Ivy looked at him, and for the first time Lucas saw real fear in her eyes. "He'll come looking for me." Lucas's jaw tightened. "Then we make sure he doesn't find you." "It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because he's—" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "He's good at this, at making you think you're crazy, at making everyone else think you're the problem. I tried to leave before, and he convinced me I couldn't, that I needed him, that no one else would understand." "That's bullshit." "I know that now. But when you're in it, when someone's telling you that every single day, it starts to feel true." Lucas leaned forward, his voice steady. "You're not crazy. And you don't need him. You're here because you decided to leave, and that took guts. Don't let him take that away from you." Ivy's eyes filled again, but this time, she didn't blink the tears back. She let them fall. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "You don't have to know. You just have to keep going, one day at a time, and you're not doing it alone." She nodded, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "Okay, okay?" "Oh." Over the next few days, a rhythm developed. Lucas went to work, dropped Emma at school, came home to find Ivy slowly coming back to herself. She cleaned, not because he asked, but because she needed something to do. She made dinner a couple of times, simple things, and sat with Emma while she did her homework. But at night, when the apartment went quiet, Lucas could hear her moving around in the living room, pacing, checking the locks, staring out the window. One night he got up and found her standing by the door, her hand on the deadbolt. "Can't sleep?" he asked. She turned, startled. "Sorry, I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't. You okay?" "I keep thinking he's going to show up, that he'll just walk in." "He won't. He doesn't know you're here." "He'll figure it out. He always does." Lucas walked over, keeping his voice calm. "If he shows up, we call the police, and he doesn't get in. I promise." Ivy looked at him, searching his face for something, certainty, maybe, or just proof that he meant it. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. "Because you needed help." "But why you? I could have called anyone, but I called you, and you didn't even ask why." Lucas was quiet for a moment. "You want the truth?" "Yeah, because when we were friends, back before everything got complicated, you were the first person who didn't look at me like I was broken. My ex had just left. Emma was a baby. I didn't know what I was doing, and you just showed up. You didn't fix anything. You just made it easier." Ivy's breath hitched. "I didn't know that." "Yeah, well, now you do. So when you called, I didn't think about it. I just came." She nodded slowly, and for the first time since she'd shown up on his doorstep, she looked like she believed him. A week later, Ivy finally told Lucas she needed to go back to the house. Not to stay, just to get her things. Clothes, documents, anything that was hers. Lucas didn't like it, but he understood. So he drove her. The house looked different in daylight, bigger, more imposing. Ivy sat in the passenger seat, staring at it like it was a fortress. "You ready?" Lucas asked. No, but let's go anyway. They walked up to the front door. Ivy used her key, she'd found it in her jacket pocket, and pushed the door open. The inside was cold, sterile. Everything was white and gray and perfectly arranged like a showroom. It didn't look like anyone lived there. Ivy led him upstairs to a bedroom. She opened the closet and Lucas saw it immediately. Empty. Not just empty, destroyed. Clothes ripped apart, thrown in piles, shoes slashed, jewelry scattered across the floor like it had been swept off a dresser in a rage. Ivy stood frozen, staring at the wreckage. "He did this," she said quietly. "After I left. He knew I'd come back for my things, so he made sure there was nothing left." Lucas felt his hands curl into fists. "We're calling the police." "On. And tell them what? That my ex trashed my stuff? They'll say it's a domestic issue. They'll tell me to file a report and move on." "This is destruction of property." "It's his house. Technically, he can do whatever he wants." Lucas stared at her. "That's insane." "Welcome to my life." She crouched down, sifting through the wreckage with shaking hands. She found a few things: a necklace her mother had given her, a photo of her and her sister, a journal. Small things. Things that mattered. Lucas helped her gather them into a bag, and they left without another word. On the drive back, Ivy was silent, staring out the window again. But this time, Lucas saw something different in her expression. Not fear. Anger. "I'm not running anymore," she said suddenly. Lucas glanced over. "What?" "I'm done running. I'm done letting him control me. I'm going to fight back." "How?" "I don't know yet, but I'll figure it out." She looked at him, and her eyes were hard. "I have to." Lucas nodded. "Then I'm with you." "You don't have to." "I know, but I am." Ivy exhaled slowly, and for the first time in a long time, she smiled. Not a big smile, not a happy one, but real. "Okay," she said, "let's do this." The decision to fight back sounded brave in the moment, but the next morning, sitting at Lucas's kitchen table with a mug of coffee going cold in her hands, Ivy felt the weight of it settle over her like a lead blanket. "I don't even know where to start," she said. Lucas was at the stove, scrambling eggs for Emma, who was coloring at the table with the intense focus only a 6-year-old could muster. He glanced over his shoulder. "Start with what you know, what he did, what you saw. Write it down. And then what? Then we figure out the next step. But you can't build a case if you don't have the facts straight first." Ivy nodded slowly. It made sense. It was logical. But the idea of putting it all down on paper, every manipulative word, every time he'd made her feel small, every moment she'd convinced herself it was normal, felt like opening a wound she'd been trying to ignore. Emma looked up from her coloring. "Are you sad?" Ivy blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "You look sad. Daddy says when people look sad, you should ask if they're okay." Lucas turned around, spatula in hand, his expression somewhere between amused and mortified. Maybe let Ivy finish her coffee first." But Ivy found herself smiling, just a little. "I'm okay, sweetie. Just thinking about some grown-up stuff." Emma seemed satisfied with that and went back to her drawing, a lopsided house with a purple sun and what might have been a dinosaur standing guard out front. After breakfast, Lucas took Emma to school, and Ivy sat down at the table with a notebook. She stared at the blank page for a long time before she finally started writing. It came out in fragments at first. Disjointed memories. The time Damien had convinced her to quit her job because he said it was too stressful for her, too demanding. The way he'd slowly isolated her from friends, always with a reason that sounded reasonable at the time. The nights he'd stayed out late without explanation, then turned it around on her when she asked, making her feel paranoid and clingy. She wrote until her hand cramped until the words blurred together. And when Lucas came back an hour later, she was still sitting there, staring at pages of her own handwriting like she didn't recognize it. "How's it going?" he asked, setting his keys on the counter. "I forgot how much there was," Ivy said quietly. "I mean, I knew, but seeing it all written out like this, it's a lot." Lucas pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "You don't have to do this all at once. I know. But if I stop now, I won't start again." He didn't argue, just sat there with her, a quiet presence that made it easier to keep going. By the time she finally put the pen down, it was past noon. Her hand ached, her head hurt, and she felt hollowed out. But the notebook was full. A record of 2 years of her life laid bare in ink. "Okay," she said, closing the notebook. "What now?" "Now we find you a lawyer." Ivy laughed, but it came out bitter. "I can't afford a lawyer. I don't even have a bank account anymore. He closed it." Lucas frowned. "He closed your account?" "It was a joint account. Technically, he had every right." "That doesn't make it okay." "I know, but it's done. And I don't have the money to fight him in court." Lucas was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he stood and grabbed his laptop from the living room, bringing it back to the table. "What are you doing?" Ivy asked. "Looking for legal aid. There are organizations that help people in situations like this. You don't need money, you just need someone who knows what they're doing." Ivy watched as he pulled up search results, scrolling through lists of nonprofits and legal clinics. She felt something twist in her chest. Not quite hope, but close. "You really think this could work?" she asked. "I think it's worth trying, and I think you deserve someone in your corner who isn't him." She nodded, swallowing hard. "Okay, let's try." Lucas found a clinic downtown that specialized in cases involving coercive control and financial abuse. They offered free consultations, and he called on Ivy's behalf while she sat there, listening to him explain her situation in calm, measured terms. When he hung up, he looked at her. "They can see you tomorrow at 10. Ivy exhaled slowly. "Okay, tomorrow." That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Ivy sat on the couch with the notebook in her lap, flipping through the pages she'd written. Lucas was in the kitchen, washing dishes, but he glanced over every now and then, checking on her without making it obvious. "Can I ask you something?" Ivy said suddenly. Lucas turned off the water and dried his hands. "Yeah." "Why didn't you ever ask me what happened? Between us, I mean, back when we were friends." Lucas leaned against the counter, considering. "Because I figured if you wanted to tell me, you would. And if you didn't, it wasn't my business. Most people would have asked." "I'm not most people." Ivy smiled faintly. "No, you're not." She hesitated, then closed the notebook and set it aside. "I stopped talking to you because Damien told me to. He said you had feelings for me, that it made him uncomfortable, that if I really cared about our relationship, I'd respect his boundaries." Lucas's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Did I have feelings for you?" "I don't know. Maybe. I didn't stick around to find out." She looked down at her hands. "I convinced myself he was right, that it was the mature thing to do. And by the time I realized how messed up that was, it felt too late to reach out. Like I'd burned the bridge." "You didn't," Lucas said simply. "It's still here." Ivy's throat tightened, and she had to look away before she started crying again. She was so tired of crying. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For not being angry, for not asking me why I stayed, for just letting me figure it out." Lucas walked over and sat down beside her, not too close, just close enough that she knew he was there. "People don't stay in bad situations because they're stupid," he said. "They stay because someone convinced them it's the best they can do. And getting out takes time. You did it. That's what matters." Ivy nodded, and for a long moment, they just sat there in the quiet. The legal clinic was in a squat brick building downtown, wedged between a laundromat and a dollar store. Ivy stood outside for a full minute, staring at the glass door, before Lucas gently nudged her forward. "You've got this," he said. "I don't feel like I've got this." "Fake it till you make it." She gave him a look, but she went inside. The waiting room was small and crowded, filled with people who looked just as nervous as she felt. Ivy checked in at the front desk, and a tired-looking woman handed her a clipboard with a stack of forms. She filled them out with shaking hands, Lucas sitting beside her, reading a magazine he clearly wasn't interested in. When her name was called, she stood, and Lucas started to stand too. "You want me to come with you?" he asked. Ivy hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, if that's okay." "Of course." They followed a young woman down a narrow hallway to a small office. The lawyer was a woman in her 40s with short gray hair and sharp eyes that didn't miss much. She introduced herself as Karen Booth and gestured for them to sit. "So," Karen said, folding her hands on the desk, "tell me what's going on." Ivy took a breath and started talking. She told Karen about Damien, about the job she'd quit, the friends she'd lost, the money she didn't have access to. She told her about the destroyed belongings, the constant calls, the way he twisted everything until she didn't trust her own judgment anymore. Karen listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. When Ivy finished, Karen sat back and studied her for a moment. "This is textbook coercive control," she said. "And the financial piece, cutting off your access to money, closing accounts, that's economic abuse. Both of those are actionable." "Actionable how?" Ivy asked. "We can file for a restraining order, and depending on the evidence, we might be able to pursue a civil case for damages. But I'll be honest with you, these cases are hard. Coercive control is difficult to prove because it's not always visible. There are no bruises, no broken bones, it's psychological. So we need a strong paper trail." Ivy pulled the notebook out of her bag and slid it across the desk. "I wrote everything down. Dates, times, things he said, as much as I could remember." Karen picked up the notebook and flipped through it, her expression unreadable. When she looked up, there was something like approval in her eyes. "This is good. This is really good. Do you have anything else? Texts, emails, voicemails?" "Some. He deleted a lot of them from my phone, but I might still have backups." "Get those. Anything you can find. Screenshots, recordings, witness statements from people who saw how he treated you. The more we have, the stronger our case." Ivy nodded, feeling a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope, exactly, but possibility. Karen leaned forward, her tone softer now. "I'm not going to lie to you, Ivy. This is going to be hard. He's going to fight back. He's going to try to make you look unstable, unreliable. He'll twist the narrative to make himself the victim. But if you're willing to see this through, I'll do everything I can to help you." "I'm willing," Ivy said, and she meant it. Karen smiled. "Good. Then let's get to work." Over the next 2 weeks, Ivy's life became a blur of documentation and preparation. She combed through her email, pulling up old messages she'd archived and forgotten. She reached out to a few old friends, people Damien had pushed out of her life, and asked if they'd be willing to write statements about what they'd seen. Most of them said yes without hesitation. Lucas helped where he could. He let Ivy use his computer, drove her to meetings with Karen, watched Emma when she needed space to think. He didn't hover, didn't push, just stayed steady. One night, after Emma had gone to bed, Ivy was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through old texts, when she came across a message from Damien that made her stomach turn. "You're nothing without me. You know that, right?" She stared at it, her chest tight, her hands clenched around the phone. Lucas walked in from the living room, saw her expression, and stopped. "What is it?" She turned the phone toward him without a word. He read the message, his jaw tightening. "When did he send that?" 6 months ago. I tried to leave, packed a bag, told him I was done. He talked me out of it, and then he sent that." Lucas set the phone down carefully, like it might explode. "He's wrong." "I know." "Do you?" Ivy looked at him, and for the first time she realized she did. She wasn't nothing. She'd survived. She'd gotten out. And she was building something new, something that belonged to her. "Yeah," she said. "I do." Lucas nodded, and the tension in his shoulders eased a little. "Good. Because you're one of the strongest people I know." Ivy felt her throat tighten, but she didn't look away. "I don't feel strong." "You don't have to feel it for it to be true." She wanted to argue, to tell him he was giving her too much credit. But the way he was looking at her, steady, certain, made it hard to doubt. "Thank you," she said quietly. "Anytime." The restraining order hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning. Ivy barely slept the night before, her mind racing through everything she needed to say, every question Karen had prepped her for. By the time Lucas knocked on the bathroom door to tell her it was time to go, she felt like she might throw up. "You okay?" he asked when she came out. "No, but I'm going anyway." He smiled. "That's the spirit." Karen met them outside the courthouse, a leather bag slung over one shoulder, looking calm and professional in a way that made Ivy feel slightly less like she was walking into a firing squad. "Ready?" Karen asked. "Not even a little." "That's normal. Just stick to what we talked about. Answer the questions, don't get defensive, and don't let him rattle you. I'll handle the rest." Ivy nodded, but her hands were shaking. Inside, the courtroom was smaller than she'd expected. Sterile. Damien was already there, sitting at a table with his own lawyer, a man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd never lost a case in his life. Damien didn't look at her when she walked in, but she could feel his presence like a weight pressing down on her chest. The judge entered and everyone stood. Ivy's legs felt like they might give out, but Lucas was right behind her, close enough that she could feel him there, solid and real. The hearing started and Karen laid out the case with precision. She presented the notebook, the texts, the witness statements. She painted a picture of a man who had systematically stripped away Ivy's autonomy, her confidence, her ability to function independently. Damien's lawyer objected at every opportunity, calling the evidence circumstantial, arguing that Ivy was exaggerating, that she was unstable and manipulative. Ivy sat there, gripping the edge of the table, forcing herself to breathe. Then it was her turn to speak. Karen guided her through it, asking questions that let her tell her story in her own words. Ivy talked about the isolation, the financial control, the way Damien had convinced her she couldn't survive without him. Her voice shook at first, but the more she spoke, the steadier it became. Damien's lawyer cross-examined her, trying to poke holes in her story. He asked why she'd stayed so long if it was really that bad. Why she hadn't gone to the police. Why she'd called Lucas instead of her family. Ivy met his eyes and didn't flinch. Because he made me believe I didn't have any other options, and by the time I realized I did, I was too afraid to act, until I wasn't. The lawyer opened his mouth to respond, but the judge held up a hand. "I've heard enough," she said. She looked at Damien, then at Ivy. "Based on the evidence presented, I'm granting a temporary restraining order. Mr. Ashford, you are to have no contact with Ms. Carter, no calls, no texts, no in-person interactions. Violation of this order will result in immediate legal consequences. We'll reconvene in 30 days for a final hearing." The gavel came down, and Ivy felt the room tilt. She'd won. Not the whole fight, not yet. But this round, this moment. Karen squeezed her shoulder and Lucas was there, steady as always. Ivy stood on shaking legs and walked out of the courtroom, leaving Damien behind. Outside, the sun was too bright, the air too cold. Ivy leaned against the courthouse steps, her breath coming in short gasps, and Lucas stood beside her, not saying anything, just letting her process. "I did it," she said finally. "Yeah, you did. I thought I was going to fall apart in there. But you didn't." She looked at him, and for the first time in weeks, she felt something other than fear or anger. She felt proud. "No," she said. "I didn't." Lucas smiled. "Told you. Stronger than you think." Ivy laughed, and it came out shaky but real. "I'm starting to believe you." They stood there for a while, just breathing, letting the weight of the last few weeks settle. Then Lucas checked his watch. "Come on, let's go pick up Emma. She's been asking about you all week." "She has?" "Yeah, she wants to show you the dinosaur painting she made in art class. Apparently it's a masterpiece." Ivy smiled, and it felt easier this time. "I'd like that." They walked to the car, and for the first time since she'd made that call in the middle of the night, Ivy felt like maybe, just maybe, she was going to be okay. That evening, Emma showed Ivy the painting with the seriousness of a gallery curator unveiling a priceless work. It was a T-Rex, or at least Ivy assumed it was, rendered in neon green and purple with teeth that looked more like piano keys. "It's incredible," Ivy said, and she meant it. Emma beamed. "Do you want to paint with me?" Ivy glanced at Lucas, who shrugged. "Fair warning, she takes her art very seriously." "I can handle it." So they sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by construction paper and paint, and for an hour, Ivy forgot about restraining orders and courtrooms, and the fact that her entire life was still in pieces. She just painted, badly, messily, and listened to Emma narrate the epic story of Mr. Chomps the dinosaur and his quest to save the world from evil broccoli. Lucas watched from the counter, smiling in that quiet way he had, and Ivy realized something she hadn't expected. She felt safe here, not just physically, but in a way that went deeper, like she could breathe without constantly looking over her shoulder. Like she could be herself, messy, uncertain, still figuring it out, and no one was going to punish her for it. When Emma finally got tired and went to wash the paint off her hands, Ivy helped Lucas clean up the table. "Thank you," she said, "for today, for all of this." "You already thanked me." "I know, but I mean it. I don't know what I would have done without you." Lucas set down the paper towels he'd been using and looked at her. "You would have figured it out. You're tougher than you give yourself credit for." "Maybe. but it's easier with you here." He didn't respond right away, just held her gaze, and Ivy felt something shift between them. Something she wasn't ready to name yet, but couldn't quite ignore. Before either of them could say anything else, Emma ran back in, still damp and grinning. "Daddy, can Ivy read me a story tonight?" Lucas raised an eyebrow. "That's up to Ivy." Ivy smiled. "I'd love to." So she did. She sat on the edge of Emma's bed reading a book about a dragon who was afraid of heights, and when Emma finally drifted off mid-page, Ivy sat there for a moment longer, watching her sleep. She thought about what Lucas had said, that she was tougher than she gave herself credit for, and maybe he was right. Maybe she was. But she also knew she didn't have to do this alone anymore, and that made all the difference. The restraining order held for exactly 9 days before Damien found a way around it. Ivy was at the grocery store picking up milk and cereal for Lucas's place when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and froze. It wasn't Damien's number. She'd blocked that weeks ago. But the message was unmistakably his. "You think a piece of paper changes anything? You'll always be mine." Her hands went numb. The phone slipped from her grip and clattered onto the floor. An older woman nearby looked over, concerned, but Ivy barely registered her. She grabbed the phone, her heart hammering, and stared at the message again, like it might disappear if she looked hard enough. It didn't. She left the card in the middle of the aisle and walked out, her breath coming too fast, her vision tunneling. By the time she got to Lucas's car, she was shaking so hard she couldn't get the key in the ignition. She sat there for a full minute, gripping the steering wheel, trying to pull herself together. Then she called Lucas. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, you okay?" "He texted me." Lucas's tone shifted immediately. "What?" "Damien. He used a different number. He said—" Her voice cracked and she had to stop. "Where are you?" "Parking lot, outside the grocery store." "Stay there, I'm coming." "You don't have to—" "Ivy, stay there." She nodded, even though he couldn't see her, then realized she hadn't answered out loud. "Okay." Lucas showed up 15 minutes later with Emma in the back seat, still in her school uniform. He parked next to Ivy's car and got out, leaving the engine running. Ivy rolled down her window and he crouched beside her, his expression tight with worry. "Let me see the message." She handed him the phone. He read it, his jaw tightening, then handed it back. "We're calling Karen and the police." "The police won't do anything. He didn't threaten me. He violated the restraining order. That's enough." Ivy wanted to argue, to say it wasn't worth it, that it would just make things worse. But the truth was, she was too tired to fight him on it. So she nodded. Lucas called Karen right there, explained what had happened, and sent her a screenshot of the message. Then he called the non-emergency line and filed a report. The officer on the phone sounded bored, like this was the 10th domestic call of the day, but he took down the details and said someone would follow up. When Lucas finally hung up, he looked at Ivy. "You're not going back to your car alone. Emma and I will follow you home." "Lucas, I'm fine." "You're shaking." She looked down at her hands and realized he was right. She clenched them into fists, trying to stop the tremor, but it didn't work. "Okay," she said quietly. "Okay." They drove back in a 2-car caravan, Emma waving at Ivy from the back seat every time they stopped at a light. It should have been ridiculous, but somehow it helped. By the time they got back to the apartment, Ivy's hands had stopped shaking. Inside, Lucas made coffee while Emma spread her homework out on the living room floor. Ivy sat at the kitchen table, staring at her phone like it was a live grenade. "He's not going to stop," she said. "The restraining order doesn't matter. He'll just keep finding ways around it." Lucas set a mug in front of her. "Then we make it matter. Karen will file a motion to hold him in contempt. If he keeps this up, he'll end up in front of a judge. And if that doesn't work?" Lucas didn't have an answer for that. He just sat down across from her, his hands wrapped around his own mug, and waited. Ivy took a breath. "What if we're not ready for this? What if I'm not ready?" "You are." "You don't know that." "I do. You've already done the hard part. You left. You filed. You showed up in court and told your story. The rest is just follow-through." Ivy wanted to believe him, but the fear sat heavy in her chest, and she couldn't shake the feeling that Damien was always one step ahead. That night, Karen called back. She'd already filed the contempt motion and scheduled an emergency hearing for the following week. The judge would decide whether Damien had violated the order and what the consequences would be. "Will he go to jail?" Ivy asked. IVT? Probably not, Karen said. Not for a first violation, but it'll go on record. And if he does it again, the penalties get steeper. Ivy closed her eyes. So we just wait. We wait, and we keep documenting everything. If he contacts you again, screenshot it, save it. Don't respond. Don't engage. Let him dig his own grave. After they hung up, Ivy sat on the couch, staring at the ceiling. Lucas was in the kitchen, helping Emma with her math homework, their voices low and easy. It sounded normal, safe, like nothing outside could touch them. But Ivy knew better. 2 days later, Damien showed up. It was a Saturday morning. Lucas had taken Emma to her soccer game, and Ivy was alone in the apartment, folding laundry in front of the TV. She didn't hear the knock at first, just thought it was part of whatever show was playing in the background. But then it came again, louder, more insistent. She froze, a towel half folded in her hands. The knock came a third time, followed by a voice she knew too well. Ivy, I know you're in there. Her stomach dropped. She set the towel down slowly, her hands trembling, and backed away from the door. Ivy, come on. We need to talk. She didn't answer, didn't move, just stood there, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. I'm not leaving until you open the door. Ivy's breath came in short, shallow gasps. She grabbed her phone and dialed Lucas with shaking hands. He answered immediately. Hey, what's up? He's here. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. What? Damien, he's outside the apartment. He's knocking on the door. Lucas swore under his breath. Do not open that door. I'm calling the police. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Lucas, do not open the door. The line went dead. Ivy stood in the middle of the living room, clutching the phone, listening to Damien's voice on the other side of the door. He wasn't yelling. That was the worst part. He sounded calm, reasonable, like he had every right to be there. Ivy, this is ridiculous. I just want to talk. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking. She didn't respond. You can't hide from me forever. You know that, right? Her chest tightened. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him to leave, but she couldn't make her voice work. Then she heard it. Footsteps. Moving away from the door, down the hall. Relief flooded through her, so sudden and overwhelming that her knees buckled. She sank onto the couch, pressing her hands to her face, trying to steady her breathing. But the relief didn't last, because a moment later there was a knock on the window. Ivy's head snapped up. The living room window faced the fire escape, and Damien was standing on the other side of the glass, looking in at her. He smiled. Ivy scrambled backward, nearly tripping over the coffee table. Damien raised a hand, tapping on the glass with his knuckles. Come on, Ivy, don't be dramatic. She grabbed her phone again, her hands shaking so badly she could barely unlock it. She pulled up the camera and started recording, holding it up so he could see. Damien's smile faltered. What are you doing? I'm documenting this. You're violating a restraining order. Get away from the window. I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm just trying to talk to you. You're not supposed to be here. Leave. Now. Or what? You'll call the cops? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. They don't care, Ivy. They never do. You think a piece of paper is going to protect you? Ivy's voice came out steadier than she felt. I think you need to leave before you make this worse for yourself. Damien stared at her for a long moment, his expression shifting from amusement to something darker. Then he stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. Fine. I'll go. But this isn't over. He disappeared from view, and Ivy stood there frozen until she heard the clang of footsteps on the fire escape, fading into the distance. She sank onto the couch, still holding the phone, the recording still running. Her whole body was shaking now, adrenaline flooding her system with nowhere to go. The front door burst open, and Lucas was there, breathless, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on her. Are you okay? Did he hurt you? Ivy shook her head. He left. Just now. He was on the fire escape. Lucas's face went pale with fury. He what? I recorded it. Everything he said. Lucas crossed the room in 3 strides and crouched in front of her, his hands on her shoulders. You're sure you're okay? I'm fine. He didn't touch me. He wouldn't leave. Lucas exhaled slowly, his grip tightening for a second before he let go and stood. Where's your phone? She handed it to him. He watched the recording, his jaw clenched, then sent it to Karen and the police without a word. When he was done, he sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. You did good, he said quietly. Recording that. Staying calm. That took guts. Ivy laughed, but it came out shaky. I didn't feel calm. You didn't have to feel it. You just had to do it. And you did. She nodded, but she couldn't stop shaking. Lucas wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her against his side. She leaned into him, letting herself breathe for the first time since she'd heard Damien's voice. He said the police won't care, she said after a while. He's wrong. Is he? Lucas was quiet for a moment. I don't know, but I care. And Karen cares. And we're not going to let him get away with this. Ivy closed her eyes, trying to believe him. The police showed up 20 minutes later. 2 officers, a man and a woman, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. They took Ivy's statement, watched the recording, and made notes in a little spiral-bound notebook. The woman seemed sympathetic. The man seemed skeptical. Has he made any direct threats? The male officer asked. He said this isn't over. That's not a direct threat. Ivy stared at him. He climbed onto the fire escape and knocked on my window. He's not supposed to be within 100 feet of me. We understand that, and we'll file a report. But unless he's made a specific, credible threat of harm, our hands are tied. Lucas stepped forward, his voice tight. So what are you saying? She has to wait until he actually hurts her before you do anything? The officer's expression didn't change. I'm saying we'll document this and pass it along to the DA's office. They'll decide whether to press charges. That's not good enough. I'm sorry, sir. That's how the system works. Lucas looked like he wanted to argue, but Ivy put a hand on his arm. It's fine, she said quietly. Thank you for coming. The officers left and Lucas stood there, hands clenched at his sides, staring at the door. That's not fine, he said. I know, but yelling at them won't help. Lucas turned to her, frustration radiating off him in waves. So what do we do? We keep going. We show up to the hearing, we let Karen do her job, and we hope it's enough. Lucas didn't look convinced, but he nodded. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Ivy sat on the couch with her notebook, adding today's events to the growing list. Lucas sat across from her, reading something on his phone, but she could tell he wasn't really paying attention. Can I ask you something? She said. He looked up. Yeah. Why are you doing this, really? Lucas set his phone down. I already told you. I know, but I need to hear it again. He was quiet for a moment, like he was choosing his words carefully. Because you didn't deserve what happened to you. And because no one should have to go through this alone. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. Ivy studied him, searching his face for something she couldn't quite name. Do you ever regret it? Letting me stay here? No? Not even a little? Not even a little. She wanted to believe him, and maybe for the first time she did. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Thursday. Karen prepped Ivy over the phone, going through what to expect, what questions might come up, how to stay focused. He's going to try to spin this, Karen said. He'll say he was just trying to talk to you, that you're overreacting, that the restraining order is unfair. Don't let him get in your head. I won't. Good. And Ivy? Bring the recording. That's our smoking gun. The courtroom was the same as before, but this time the stakes felt higher. Damien was already there when they arrived, sitting at the defense table in a suit that probably cost more than Ivy's rent. He looked calm, composed, like this was just another inconvenience in his day. Ivy sat down next to Karen, and Lucas took a seat in the gallery behind her. She could feel Damien's eyes on her, but she didn't look at him. She kept her gaze forward, her hands folded in her lap, breathing slow and steady. The judge entered, and the hearing began. Karen presented the evidence methodically. The text message, the recording from the fire escape, the police report. She argued that Damien had willfully and knowingly violated the restraining order, and that his behavior posed a continued threat to Ivy's safety. Damien's lawyer countered with a performance that was almost impressive in its audacity. He claimed Damien had simply been trying to have a civil conversation, that he didn't realize approaching the apartment constituted a violation, that Ivy was exaggerating the situation to paint him in a bad light. My client has been nothing but respectful, the lawyer said. He's followed every legal avenue available to him. Ms. Carter, on the other hand, has weaponized the court system to punish him for a relationship that simply didn't work out. Ivy's hands clenched in her lap, but she forced herself to stay still. Then it was Damien's turn to speak. He stood, smooth and confident, and addressed the judge with the kind of calm authority that had convinced Ivy, once upon a time, that he was someone worth listening to. Your Honor, I want to be clear. I have nothing but respect for Ivy. I care about her. I always have. And I'm concerned about her well-being. She's been staying with someone she barely knows, making decisions that I don't think are in her best interest. I went to the apartment because I was worried. That's all. Ivy felt something cold settle in her chest. He sounded so reasonable, so sincere. And for a second she could see how someone who didn't know the whole story might believe him. But then Karen stood. Your Honor, may I present Exhibit C? She played the recording. Damien's voice filled the courtroom, calm and chilling. You can't hide from me forever. You know that, right? The judge's expression shifted. Karen let the recording play all the way through, then paused. Does that sound like concern for Ms. Carter's well-being? Or does it sound like intimidation? Damien's lawyer opened his mouth to object, but the judge held up a hand. I've heard enough. She looked at Damien, and her tone was ice. Mr. Ashford, you were explicitly ordered to have no contact with Ms. Carter. You sent her a text message from a different number. You showed up at her residence. You climbed onto a fire escape and knocked on her window. That is not concern. That is harassment, and it stops now. Damien's calm facade cracked just for a second. I'm extending the restraining order for another 6 months, the judge continued, and I'm adding a clause. If you violate it again, even once, you will be held in contempt and face jail time. Do I make myself clear? Damien's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Good. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down and Ivy felt the tension drain out of her all at once. She sagged in her chair and Karen put a hand on her shoulder. You did it, Karen said quietly. Ivy nodded, but she couldn't speak. Lucas was there a moment later, helping her to her feet. They walked out of the courtroom together, and this time Ivy didn't look back. Outside, the air was crisp and cold, and Ivy stood on the courthouse steps, letting it fill her lungs. 6 months, she said. 6 months, Lucas echoed. What if he doesn't stop? Then we'll deal with it. But for now, you're safe. Ivy looked at him, and for the first time in weeks, she felt like maybe that was true. They went home, and that night, after Emma had gone to bed, Ivy sat on the couch with Lucas, the notebook in her lap. I think I'm done writing in this, she said. Lucas glanced over. Yeah? Yeah. I don't need to keep track anymore. It's over. It's not over yet. The final hearing is in 6 months. I know, but this part is. The part where I was just surviving. I'm ready to start living again. Lucas smiled. Good. You deserve that. Ivy closed the notebook and set it aside. And for the first time in a long time, she believed him. The weeks that followed the contempt hearing felt different. Not easier exactly. Ivy still woke up some nights with her heart racing, convinced she'd heard Damien's voice outside the window. But the sharp edge of fear had dulled into something more manageable. She could breathe again without feeling like her lungs were closing up. She started looking for work. Nothing fancy at first, just something to get her back on her feet. Karen had connected her with a nonprofit that helped people rebuild after abusive relationships, and they'd offered her a part-time administrative position. It wasn't much, but it was hers. Money she earned. Independence she controlled. Lucas drove her to the interview, waited in the parking lot, and when she came out with the job, he'd grinned like she'd won the lottery. Told you, he'd said. Told me what? That you'd figure it out. She'd rolled her eyes, but she couldn't stop smiling. Emma had been thrilled when Ivy told her she'd gotten a job. She'd made a congratulations card out of construction paper, complete with glitter and a drawing of what might have been ivy, or possibly a very tall flower. Ivy had taped it to the fridge, and every time she saw it, something in her chest loosened a little more. Life was starting to feel normal, or at least a version of normal she could live with. But Damien wasn't done. It started small. A car that looked like his parked across the street from Lucas's building. A missed call from an unknown number that rang once and hung up. Things that could have been coincidence but felt deliberate. Ivy didn't say anything at first. She told herself she was being paranoid, that the restraining order was working, that Damien had finally gotten the message. But the feeling wouldn't go away. Then, 3 weeks after the contempt hearing, Emma came home from school upset. Lucas noticed it first. She was quiet during dinner, pushing her food around her plate without eating, her usual chatter replaced by silence. Em, you okay? He asked. She shrugged. Did something happen at school? Another shrug. Lucas exchanged a glance with Ivy, who set down her fork and leaned forward. Emma, sweetheart, you can tell us. Whatever it is. Emma looked up, her eyes shiny with unshed tears. There was a man. Ivy's stomach dropped. Lucas's voice went very calm, very steady. What man? Outside school. When we were waiting for you to pick me up, he was standing by the fence, and he was looking at me. What did he look like? Emma thought about it. Tall. He had dark hair, and he smiled at me, but it was a weird smile, like he knew me, but I didn't know him. Ivy felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at Lucas, and she could see the same realization settling over him. Did he say anything to you? Lucas asked, his voice still calm, but his knuckles white around his fork. No. Miss Caroline came over and asked if he needed help, and he just walked away. Lucas exhaled slowly. Okay, you did the right thing by telling me. If you ever see that man again, you tell a teacher right away, and you don't go anywhere near him. Understand? Emma nodded, her eyes wide. You're not in trouble, Ivy added quickly. You didn't do anything wrong. We just want to make sure you're safe. Emma nodded again, and Lucas reached over to squeeze her hand. After Emma went to bed, Lucas and Ivy sat at the kitchen table, the silence between them heavy. It was him, Ivy said finally. We don't know that. Yes, we do. Lucas didn't argue. He just sat there, staring at his hands, his jaw tight. He's escalating, Ivy said. First the text, then showing up here, and now… She stopped, her throat closing up. He went after Emma. He didn't go after her. He was at her school, Lucas. He was watching her. That's not a coincidence. Lucas stood abruptly, pacing to the window and back. I'm calling Karen and the police. Again. They won't do anything. He didn't touch her. He didn't even talk to her. I don't care. They need to know. Ivy watched him, her chest tight. What if the restraining order isn't enough? What if he keeps finding ways around it? Lucas stopped pacing and looked at her. Then we figure out what's next. But we don't give up. Not now. Ivy wanted to believe him. But the fear was back, sharper than before, and it was harder to push down this time. Karen called back the next morning. She'd already filed another motion to extend the restraining order and include Emma as a protected party. But she was blunt about the limitations. Unless he makes a direct threat or physically harms someone, the court's hands are tied, she said. I know that's not what you want to hear, but it's the reality. So what do we do? Ivy asked. You keep documenting, you keep reporting, and you prepare for the final hearing. That's where we make our case, not just for the restraining order, but for a permanent injunction. If we can prove a pattern of behavior, we have a shot. Ivy hung up and sat on the couch, staring at nothing. Lucas was at work, and Emma was at school. The apartment was quiet, and Ivy felt the weight of it pressing down on her. She'd thought she was done being afraid. She'd thought the hard part was over, but it wasn't, and maybe it never would be. The next few days were a blur of police reports and legal paperwork. The school agreed to add extra security during pickup and drop-off times. Lucas started working from home more often, unwilling to leave Ivy and Emma alone for too long. Ivy hated it. Hated that Damien's shadow was still looming over them. Hated that Lucas's life was being turned upside down because of her. Hated that Emma was caught in the middle of something she didn't deserve. One night, after Emma had gone to bed, Ivy found Lucas in the kitchen, staring at his laptop with a look of frustration she'd never seen before. What's wrong? She asked. He glanced up, then closed the laptop. Nothing. Work stuff. Lucas, he sighed, I'm behind on a project. My boss is asking why I'm working from home so much, and I don't know what to tell him. Ivy's chest tightened. You should tell him the truth. I'm not going to… You should, because this is affecting your job, and that's not fair to you. Lucas stood, crossing his arms. You think I care about that right now? You think I'm worried about a deadline when some psychopath is stalking my kid's school? He's not stalking your kid. He's stalking me. And you're paying the price for it. That's not how I see it. Then how do you see it? Lucas was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I see someone who needed help, and I'm glad I could give it. I see someone who's been through hell and is still standing, and I see someone I care about. So yeah, work can wait. Ivy felt her throat tighten. I don't know what to say to that. You don't have to say anything. She looked at him, and the space between them felt charged with something she couldn't name. Something that had been building for weeks, maybe longer. Lucas. The moment shattered when his phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted. It's the school. He answered, and Ivy watched as his face went pale. We'll be right there, he said, then hung up. What happened? Someone tried to pick up Emma, said he was a family friend. The teacher didn't recognize him, so she refused. But Emma saw him through the window. Ivy felt the floor tilt. Was it? She said it looked like the man from before. They were in the car in under 2 minutes, Lucas driving faster than he should have, his hands white-knuckled on the wheel. Ivy sat in the passenger seat, her mind racing through a dozen worst-case scenarios. When they got to the school, Emma was sitting in the principal's office with her teacher, Miss Caroline, who looked shaken. Emma ran to Lucas the moment she saw him, wrapping her arms around his waist. I'm okay, Daddy. I didn't go with him. Lucas crouched down, holding her tight. I know, Bug. You did exactly the right thing. The principal, a stern woman in her 50s, filled them in. A man had approached the front desk claiming to be picking up Emma on behalf of her father. When the receptionist asked for ID, he'd gotten defensive and left. The school had already called the police. Ivy felt nauseous. Did anyone get a description, a license plate? The receptionist said he was tall, dark hair, well-dressed, but he was gone before anyone could get a plate number. Lucas's jaw tightened. We need to see the security footage. The principal hesitated. The police will review it as part of their investigation. I want to see it now. There was something in Lucas's tone that left no room for argument. The principal nodded and led them to a small office where the security monitors were set up. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. Ivy watched as a man approached the front desk, confident and composed. He gestured as he spoke, his body language relaxed, like this was a routine pickup. And then he turned toward the camera. Ivy's breath caught. It was Damien. Lucas saw it too. He leaned forward, his hands braced on the desk, staring at the screen like he could reach through it and drag Damien out by the collar. That's him, Ivy said, her voice shaking. That's Damien. The principal looked between them. You know this man? He has a restraining order against him, Lucas said. He's not supposed to be within 100 feet of Ivy or Emma, and he just tried to take my daughter. The principal's expression went from concerned to alarmed. I'll make sure the police get this footage immediately. Lucas straightened. Good. Because if they don't do something this time, I will. Ivy put a hand on his arm. Lucas. He looked at her and she could see the fury simmering just beneath the surface. But he nodded, taking a breath. They took Emma home, and Lucas called Karen from the car. By the time they got back to the apartment, Karen had already filed an emergency motion and contacted the DA's office. This crosses a line, Karen said over speakerphone. Attempting to take a child, that's not harassment. That's attempted kidnapping. The DA will take this seriously. Will they arrest him? Ivy asked. I can't promise that. But they'll bring him in for questioning, and if he violated the restraining order again, which he clearly did, he's looking at jail time. Lucas's grip on the phone was so tight, Ivy thought it might crack. How long? Could be days, could be weeks. The system moves slow. That's not good enough. I know, but it's what we've got. After Karen hung up, Lucas sat on the couch. Emma curled up beside him watching a cartoon. Ivy sat on the other side, her mind spinning. What if they don't arrest him? She said quietly. What if he tries again? Lucas didn't answer right away. Then he said, Then we leave. Ivy looked at him. What? We pack up and leave. Go somewhere he can't find us. Lucas, you can't just uproot your entire life because of me. Why not? Because you have a job. Emma has school. You have a life here. And none of that matters if she's not safe. He looked at her, his expression resolute. If it comes down to it, we leave. All of us. Ivy felt tears prick her eyes. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking. I'm offering. She wanted to argue, to tell him it was too much, that he'd already done enough. But the truth was, she didn't want to do this alone anymore. And the idea of Lucas and Emma being part of whatever came next, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like hope. Okay. she said quietly. Lucas reached over and took her hand, and they sat there in silence, holding on. The police came the next day. 2 detectives, this time not just patrol officers. They took statements from everyone: Lucas, Ivy, Emma, the school staff. They reviewed the security footage, confirmed it was Damien, and issued a warrant for his arrest. "We'll bring him in," one of the detectives said. "But I want to be clear, bail is likely. Even with the restraining order violation and the attempted pickup, he's got no prior record. A good lawyer will argue he made a mistake, that he didn't understand the terms of the order." Ivy felt the hope drain out of her. "So he'll be out in a day." "Maybe, maybe not. But you should prepare for that possibility." After they left, Ivy sat at the kitchen table, staring at her hands. Lucas was on the phone with work, explaining that he needed to take some time off. Emma was in her room, playing with her toys like nothing had happened. Ivy felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. The fear, the uncertainty, the knowledge that no matter what they did, Damien always seemed to find a way around it. She thought about what Lucas had said, about leaving, about starting over somewhere Damien couldn't reach them. And for the first time, she let herself imagine it. A new city, a new life, a future that didn't include looking over her shoulder every time she left the house. It felt impossible, but so had leaving in the first place. And she'd done that. Maybe she could do this too. Lucas came back into the kitchen, setting his phone down. "Okay, I've got 2 weeks off. After that, we'll figure it out." Ivy looked at him. "Are you sure about this?" "About what?" "All of it. Helping me. Putting your life on hold, risking—" She stopped, her voice breaking. "Risking Emma." Lucas pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. "Emma's not at risk because of you. She's at risk because some guy doesn't know how to let go. And yeah, I'm sure about all of it." Ivy nodded, blinking back tears. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to." "I do. Because you didn't have to do any of this. And you did anyway." Lucas reached across the table and took her hand. "You would have done the same for me." "You don't know that." "Yeah, I do." They sat there for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. Then Ivy squeezed his hand and let go. "So what now?" she asked. "Now we wait. And we prepare for the final hearing. Karen says it's in 2 weeks. 2 weeks? Yeah. And then this is over. One way or another." Ivy nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it wouldn't be that simple. Damien was arrested 3 days later. The police picked him up at his office in front of his colleagues, and Ivy felt a grim satisfaction when Karen told her. But the satisfaction didn't last. He made bail in under 6 hours. Karen called with the update, her tone flat. "He's out. Bail was set at $50,000. He posted it immediately." "Of course he did," Ivy said. "There's a condition. He's not allowed to leave the state, and he has to wear an ankle monitor. But yeah, he's out." Ivy closed her eyes, leaning against the kitchen counter. "So nothing's changed." "It's changed. He's on record now. Multiple violations, attempted contact with a minor. It's all documented. When we go into the final hearing, we'll have everything we need to make this permanent." "And if that's not enough?" Karen was quiet for a moment. "Then we explore other options. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. We've got a strong case. Stronger than most. We just need to see it through." After she hung up, Ivy stood in the kitchen, staring at nothing. Lucas came in a few minutes later, took one look at her, and knew. "He's out." "Yeah." Lucas swore under his breath, then walked over and pulled her into a hug. Ivy let herself lean into him, just for a moment, feeling the steady rise and fall of his breathing. "We're going to get through this," he said quietly. "I want to believe that." "Then believe it. Because it's true." Ivy pulled back, looking up at him. "What if it's not? What if we do everything right and he still wins?" "He won't." "You can't know that." "No, but I can choose to believe it anyway, and so can you." Ivy wanted to argue, but she was too tired, so she just nodded and let him hold her a little longer. The final hearing was set for a Tuesday morning. Ivy barely slept the night before, running through everything Karen had told her, everything she needed to say, every question she might be asked. Lucas stayed up with her, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee he wasn't drinking, just being there. "You're going to do great," he said at one point. You don't know that. Yeah, I do. You've already done the hardest part. This is just the finish line. Ivy looked at him, and something in his calm certainty made her believe it. Just a little. The next morning, they got up early. Lucas made breakfast, Emma ate her cereal in sleepy silence, and Ivy tried not to throw up. Mrs. Alvarez came over to watch Emma, and Lucas and Ivy drove to the courthouse together. Karen met them outside, her expression calm and focused. Ready? She asked. Ivy nodded, even though she wasn't. Good. Let's go win this. They walked into the courtroom, and Ivy felt the weight of it settle over her. This was it. The moment everything came down to. Damien was already there, sitting with his lawyer, looking as composed as ever. He glanced at her when she walked in, and for a second their eyes met. Ivy didn't look away. She sat down next to Karen, Lucas right behind her, and waited for the judge to enter. And when the gavel came down, she took a breath and prepared to fight. The judge was the same woman from before. Judge Marilyn Torres, her nameplate read. She had the kind of face that didn't give anything away, the kind that had seen too many cases like this to be shocked by much anymore. She settled into her seat, adjusted her glasses, and looked down at the file in front of her. We're here for the final hearing on the restraining order petition filed by Ms. Ivy Carter against Mr. Damien Ashford, she said. Ms. Booth, you may proceed. Karen stood, smoothing down her jacket, and began laying out the case with the precision of someone who'd done this 100 times. She walked the judge through the timeline, the initial incident, the restraining order, the violations, the escalation. She presented the texts, the recordings, the police reports. She called attention to the school incident, the security footage, the fact that Damien had attempted to gain access to a child who wasn't even his. This is not a case of miscommunication or a relationship gone sour, Karen said. This is a deliberate, systematic campaign of control and intimidation. Mr. Ashford has shown, repeatedly, that he will not respect boundaries, he will not respect the law, and he will not stop unless this court intervenes. Damien's lawyer, a man named Gregory Hale, who looked like he charged by the minute, stood and countered with the same smooth confidence he'd shown before. He painted Damien as a concerned ex-partner, someone who'd made mistakes but had no malicious intent. He argued that the restraining order was overly broad, that Ivy was exaggerating the threat, that Damien had simply been trying to have a conversation. My client has complied with every legal requirement placed on him, Hale said. He wore the ankle monitor. He stayed within state lines. Yes, there were missteps, but those missteps were born out of concern, not malice. Ms. Carter has painted him as a monster, but the evidence simply doesn't support that narrative. Ivy sat there, her hands clenched in her lap, listening to him twist everything into something unrecognizable. She wanted to scream, to stand up and tell the judge that none of it was true, but Karen had prepared her for this, had told her to stay calm, to let the evidence speak. So she stayed quiet. Then Karen called her to the stand. Ivy stood, her legs shaking, and walked to the witness box. She was sworn in, and Karen guided her through the testimony with the same steady calm she'd shown from the beginning. Ms. Carter, can you describe your relationship with Mr. Ashford? Ivy took a breath. We were together for 2 years. At first it was good. He was charming, attentive, but over time things changed. He became controlling. He didn't like me seeing my friends, so I stopped. He didn't like my job, so I quit. He convinced me I couldn't manage my own money, so he took over the finances, and by the end, I didn't recognize myself anymore. When did you realize you needed to leave? When I looked in the mirror one day and didn't know who I was looking at. I'd become this hollow version of myself, and I knew if I stayed, I'd disappear completely. Karen nodded. And when you left, what happened? He didn't let me go. He called constantly. He showed up at places he knew I'd be. He destroyed everything I owned, and when I got the restraining order, he just found ways around it. Can you describe the incident at the school? Ivy's voice wavered, but she kept going. He tried to pick up Emma, Lucas's daughter. She's 6 years old. He told the school he was a family friend, and when they wouldn't let him take her, he left. But Emma saw him, and she was scared. Hale stood. Objection, Your Honor. Ms. Carter wasn't present at the school. This is hearsay. Judge Torres looked at Karen. Ms. Booth? The school principal and the security footage both corroborate the incident, Your Honor. Ms. Carter's testimony is relevant to the pattern of behavior. The judge considered, then nodded. Overruled. Continue. Karen turned back to Ivy. Why do you believe Mr. Ashford went to the school? To send a message, to show me he could get to the people I care about, to remind me that he's always watching. And are you still afraid of him? Ivy looked across the courtroom at Damien. He was watching her with that same calm, unreadable expression. And for the first time, she didn't look away. Yes, she said. I'm still afraid. But I'm not going to let that stop me anymore. Karen sat down, and Hale stood for cross-examination. He tried the same tactics he'd used before, implying she was exaggerating, suggesting she was unstable, questioning why she'd stayed so long if it was really that bad. But Ivy had heard it all before, and this time she was ready. You stayed with Mr. Ashford for 2 years, Hale said. If he was as controlling as you claim, why didn't you leave sooner? Because he made me believe I couldn't, that I needed him, that no one else would understand, and it took me 2 years to realize that was a lie. And yet, you never filed a police report until after you'd already left. Doesn't that seem convenient? Ivy's jaw tightened. I didn't file a report because I didn't think anyone would believe me. Because people like you would ask questions like that and make it seem like it was my fault for staying. Hale opened his mouth to respond, but Judge Torres held up a hand. Mr. Hale, I think we've established Ms. Carter's reasons for her actions. Move on. Hale's expression flickered with frustration, but he nodded. No further questions. Ivy stepped down, her legs barely holding her, and returned to her seat. Lucas reached forward from the row behind her and squeezed her shoulder. She didn't turn around, but she felt it, steady, grounding. Then it was Damien's turn. He took the stand with the same calm confidence he'd had throughout the entire process. Hale guided him through a carefully constructed narrative, one where he was the victim, where Ivy had overreacted, where everything he'd done had been misunderstood. I never meant to hurt her, Damien said, his voice smooth and sincere. I cared about Ivy. I still do. I just wanted to make sure she was okay. I know I made mistakes, but I never intended to scare her. Ivy felt her stomach turn. He sounded so reasonable, so genuine. And for a second, she wondered if anyone in the room could see through it. Then Karen stood for cross-examination. Mr. Ashford, you say you cared about Miss Carter. Is that why you destroyed all of her belongings after she left? Damien hesitated, just for a second. I was angry. I didn't handle it well. And the text message you sent her from a different number after the restraining order was issued, was that also because you cared? I just wanted to talk to her. I didn't think it would be a problem. Even though the restraining order explicitly stated you were to have no contact? Damien faltered. I didn't think one message would matter. Karen stepped closer. And showing up at her residence, climbing onto the fire escape and knocking on the window? Was that also just wanting to talk? I was worried about her. And going to the school where Emma attends, attempting to pick her up without permission? How does that fit into your concern for Ms. Carter? Damien's calm facade was cracking now. I wasn't trying to take the child. I was trying to get a message to Ivy. By using a 6-year-old as a pawn? That's not... Yes or no, Mr. Ashford. Did you attempt to pick up Emma from school? Damien's jaw tightened. I went to the school, yes, but I wasn't trying to. Yes or no? Yes. Karen let the silence hang for a moment, then turned to the judge. No further questions, Your Honor. Damien stepped down, and Ivy could see the anger simmering beneath his surface. He sat down next to Hale, his hands clenched on the table, and didn't look at anyone. Judge Torres took a moment to review her notes, then looked up. I've heard enough, she said. Mr. Ashford, you've repeatedly violated the terms of the restraining order. You've engaged in behavior that is, at best, harassing and at worst, predatory. You attempted to gain access to a minor child who is not your own under false pretenses. This court takes these violations seriously. Damien's lawyer started to stand, but the judge held up a hand. I'm granting a permanent restraining order. Mr. Ashford, you are to have no contact with Miss Carter or any member of her household, including Emma Hale. You are to stay at least 500 feet away from her residence, her workplace, and any location she frequents. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and criminal charges. Do you understand? Damien's face went pale. Your Honor, Do you understand? He swallowed hard. Yes. Good. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down, and Ivy felt the weight lift off her chest all at once. She sagged in her chair, and Karen put a hand on her shoulder. "You did it," Karen said quietly. Ivy nodded, but she couldn't speak, couldn't process what had just happened. Lucas was there a second later, helping her to her feet, and they walked out of the courtroom together. Damien was still sitting at the defense table, staring at nothing, and Ivy didn't look back. Outside, the air was cold and sharp, and Ivy stood on the courthouse steps, letting it fill her lungs. Lucas stood beside her, and for a long moment, neither of them said anything. Then Ivy started crying. Not quiet tears, full body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep and raw. Lucas pulled her into his arms, and she let herself fall apart, right there on the steps, not caring who saw. "It's over," she said between sobs. "It's really over." "Yeah," Lucas said, his voice rough. "It is." They stood there until Ivy had cried herself out, until the tears stopped, and all that was left was exhaustion. Then they got in the car and drove home. Emma was waiting for them when they got back, sitting at the kitchen table with Mrs. Alvarez coloring. She looked up when they walked in, her face lighting up. "Did you win?" Lucas smiled. "Yeah, Bug, we won." Emma grinned and went back to her coloring like it was just another day, and maybe for her it was. Mrs. Alvarez squeezed Ivy's hand on her way out. "I'm proud of you," she said quietly. Ivy nodded, her throat tight, and watched her go. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Ivy sat on the couch with Lucas, the apartment quiet around them. "What happens now?" she asked. Lucas looked at her. "What do you want to happen?" Ivy thought about it. "I want to rebuild. I want to figure out who I am without him. I want to stop being afraid." "You will." "How do you know?" "Because you already started." Ivy looked at him, and something shifted in the space between them. Something that had been building for weeks, but neither of them had named. "Lucas?" "I know," he said quietly. "I feel it too." "I don't know if I'm ready." "That's okay. We don't have to figure it out tonight." Ivy nodded, and they sat there in the quiet, just existing in the same space. And it was enough. The weeks that followed were different, lighter. Ivy started her job at the nonprofit, and she was good at it, better than she'd expected. She helped other people navigate the same system she'd just survived, and there was something deeply satisfying about turning her experience into something useful. She found an apartment, a small one-bedroom, on the other side of town, close enough to Lucas's place that Emma could visit, but far enough that Ivy felt like she had her own space. Lucas helped her move in, and Emma insisted on bringing Mr. Chomps to protect the new place from bad guys. "He's very good at his job," Emma said seriously, setting the stuffed dinosaur on Ivy's couch. Ivy smiled. "I can see that." Life settled into a rhythm. Ivy worked, spent time with Lucas and Emma, and slowly started reconnecting with the friends she'd lost. Some of them didn't understand why she'd stayed so long, but others did. And those were the ones she kept. She started therapy, which was harder than she'd expected. Talking about Damien, about the years she'd spent under his control, about the person she'd been before, and the person she was trying to become. It felt like peeling back layers of scar tissue, but her therapist was patient, and Ivy kept showing up. One Saturday afternoon, about 2 months after the final hearing, Ivy was at Lucas's apartment helping Emma with a school project about family. Emma had drawn a picture of the three of them, Lucas, Ivy, and herself, standing in front of a house with a purple sun overhead. "Is this okay?" Emma asked, holding up the drawing. Ivy looked at it, her chest tight. "It's perfect." Lucas came over, drying his hands on a dish towel, and looked at the drawing. "That's us?" Emma nodded. "Yep, our family." Lucas glanced at Ivy, and she saw the question in his eyes. She smiled just a little and nodded. "Yeah," Lucas said, ruffling Emma's hair. "That's us." Later, after Emma had gone to play in her room, Lucas and Ivy sat at the kitchen table with coffee. "She thinks of you as family," Lucas said. "I know." "Does that bother you?" Ivy thought about it. "No, it doesn't." Lucas reached across the table and took her hand. "Good. Because I think of you that way too." Ivy felt her throat tighten. "Lucas, I don't want to mess this up. I don't want to hurt you or Emma if I'm not ready." "Then we'll take it slow." "As slow as you need, but I'm not going anywhere." Ivy looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe it, believe that this could work, that she could have this. Okay, she said. Slow. Lucas smiled. Slow. They sat there, hands linked across the table, and Ivy felt something settle in her chest. Not fear, not uncertainty, just peace. 6 months later, Ivy stood in her apartment packing boxes. She was moving. Not far, just to a bigger place that had room for a home office and a guest bedroom for when Emma stayed over. Lucas had offered to help, and he was in the kitchen now, wrapping dishes in newspaper while Emma supervised. "You're doing it wrong, Daddy," Emma said. "How am I doing it wrong?" "You have to wrap them tighter, otherwise they'll break." Lucas sighed. "You're a tough boss, you know that?" Emma grinned. "I know." Ivy smiled, listening to them bicker, and felt something warm spread through her chest. This was her life now. Messy, imperfect, but hers. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at it. A message from Karen. "Just wanted to check in." "How are you doing?" Ivy typed back. "Good. Really good. Glad to hear it. You earned it." Ivy set the phone down and looked around the apartment, at the boxes, at the life she was building, at the future she'd fought so hard for. She thought about Damien briefly and realized she didn't feel afraid anymore. He was just a chapter in her story now, a painful one, but one that was over. She thought about the restraining order, about the courtroom, about the moment the judge had said the word permanent, and she realized that wasn't the moment she'd won. She'd won the night she made that phone call to Lucas. The moment she decided she was worth saving. Everything else had just been follow-through. Lucas came out of the kitchen, wiping his hands on his jeans. "You okay?" Ivy nodded. "Yeah, I'm good." He walked over and kissed her forehead. "Good. Because Emma wants to know if we can order pizza for dinner." Ivy laughed. "Pizza sounds perfect." They ordered pizza. They finished packing. And that night, after Emma had fallen asleep on the couch, Ivy and Lucas sat on the floor, surrounded by boxes, eating leftover slices and talking about nothing in particular. "Can I ask you something?" Ivy said. "Always. Do you ever regret it, answering that call?" Lucas looked at her, his expression serious. "Not once." "Even when it got complicated?" "Especially then." He reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "You're worth it, Ivy. All of it." Ivy felt tears prick her eyes, but they were the good kind, the kind that came from being seen, really seen, and not found wanting. "I love you," she said quietly. Lucas smiled. "I love you too." They sat there in the quiet, surrounded by the remnants of her old life and the beginnings of her new one, and Ivy realized something she'd been too afraid to admit before. She was happy. Not in a perfect, tied up with a bow kind of way, but in the messy, complicated, real kind of way. The kind that came from surviving something hard and coming out the other side stronger. She thought about this woman who'd sat on that curb outside Damien's house, shaking and afraid, convinced she had nowhere else to go. And she wished she could go back and tell her that it would be okay, that she'd find her way, that there were people who would help her, who would stand by her, who would remind her that she was worth fighting for. But she couldn't go back. She could only go forward, and that was enough. Years later, when Emma was older and asked about how Ivy and Lucas had gotten together, Ivy would tell her the truth. Not the sanitized version, but the real one. About fear and courage, and the kind of love that shows up in the middle of the night when you need it most. She'd tell her that leaving was the hardest thing she'd ever done, and that it was also the best. She'd tell her that healing wasn't a straight line, that there were setbacks and hard days and moments when she wanted to give up. But that she didn't. Because she had people who reminded her she was worth it, and she'd tell her that sometimes the people who save you aren't the ones you expect. Sometimes they're just someone who picks up the phone at 11:47 p.m. and says, without hesitation, "I'm coming," because that's what love is. Not grand gestures or perfect moments, just showing up over and over again. Until the person you're showing up for remembers how to show up for themselves. Ivy had learned that the hard way, but she'd learned it, and she carried it with her every single day. The restraining order became permanent. Damien moved to another state, and Ivy never heard from him again. She didn't know if he'd changed, if he'd learned anything, if he'd ever realized the damage he'd done. And after a while, she stopped wondering, because it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was the life she'd built, the job she loved, the people who loved her back, the little girl who called her family, the man who'd reminded her what kindness looked like. What mattered was that she'd survived, and more than that, she'd thrived. And if there was a lesson in all of it, it was this. You don't have to be perfect to be worthy of love. You don't have to have it all figured out to deserve kindness. You don't have to be strong all the time to be brave. You just have to keep going. One step at a time. One day at a time. Until the weight gets lighter and the path gets clearer and you look around and realize you're not just surviving anymore. You're living. And that, Ivy thought, was everything. The judge was the same woman from before, Judge Marilyn Torres. Her nameplate read. She had the kind of face that didn't give anything away, the kind that had seen too many cases like this to be shocked by much anymore. She settled into her seat, adjusted her glasses, and looked down at the file in front of her. We're here for the final hearing on the restraining order petition filed by Ms. Ivy Carter against Mr. Damien Ashford, she said. Ms. Booth, you may proceed. Karen stood, smoothing down her jacket, and began laying out the case with the precision of someone who'd done this 100 times. She walked the judge through the timeline, the initial incident, the restraining order, the violations, the escalation. She presented the texts, the recordings, the police reports. She called attention to the school incident, the security footage, the fact that Damien had attempted to gain access to a child who wasn't even his. This is not a case of miscommunication or a relationship gone sour, Karen said. This is a deliberate, systematic campaign of control and intimidation. Mr. Ashford has shown, repeatedly, that he will not respect boundaries. He will not respect the law. And he will not stop unless this court intervenes. Damien's lawyer, a man named Gregory Hale, who looked like he charged by the minute, stood and countered with the same smooth confidence he'd shown before. He painted Damien as a concerned ex-partner, someone who'd made mistakes but had no malicious intent. He argued that the restraining order was overly broad, that Ivy was exaggerating the threat, that Damien had simply been trying to have a conversation. My client has complied with every legal requirement placed on him, Hale said. He wore the ankle monitor. He stayed within state lines. Yes, there were missteps, but those missteps were born out of concern, not malice. Ms. Carter has painted him as a monster, but the evidence simply doesn't support that narrative. Ivy sat there, her hands clenched in her lap, listening to him twist everything into something unrecognizable. She wanted to scream, to stand up and tell the judge that none of it was true. But Karen had prepared her for this, had told her to stay calm, to let the evidence speak. So she stayed quiet. Then Karen called her to the stand. Ivy stood, her legs shaking, and walked to the witness box. She was sworn in, and Karen guided her through the testimony with the same steady calm she'd shown from the beginning. Ms. Carter, can you describe your relationship with Mr. Ashford? Ivy took a breath. We were together for 2 years. At first it was good. He was charming, attentive. But over time things changed. He became controlling. He didn't like me seeing my friends, so I stopped. He didn't like my job, so I quit. He convinced me I couldn't manage my own money, so he took over the finances. And by the end, I didn't recognize myself anymore. When did you realize you needed to leave? When I looked in the mirror one day and didn't know who I was looking at. I'd become this hollow version of myself, and I knew if I stayed, I'd disappear completely. Karen nodded. And when you left, what happened? He didn't let me go. He called constantly. He showed up at places he knew I'd be. He destroyed everything I owned, and when I got the restraining order, he just found ways around it. Can you describe the incident at the school? Ivy's voice wavered, but she kept going. He tried to pick up Emma, Lucas's daughter. She's 6 years old. He told the school he was a family friend, and when they wouldn't let him take her, he left. But Emma saw him, and she was scared. Hale stood. Objection, Your Honor. Ms. Carter wasn't present at the school. This is hearsay. Judge Torres looked at Karen. Ms. Booth? The school principal and the security footage both corroborate the incident, Your Honor. Ms. Carter's testimony is relevant to the pattern of behavior. The judge considered, then nodded. Overruled. Continue. Karen turned back to Ivy. Why do you believe Mr. Ashford went to the school? To send a message. To show me he could get to the people I care about. To remind me that he's always watching. And are you still afraid of him? Ivy looked across the courtroom at Damien. He was watching her with that same calm, unreadable expression. And for the first time, she didn't look away. Yes, she said, I'm still afraid, but I'm not going to let that stop me anymore. Karen sat down and Hale stood for cross-examination. He tried the same tactics he'd used before, implying she was exaggerating, suggesting she was unstable, questioning why she'd stayed so long if it was really that bad. But Ivy had heard it all before, and this time she was ready. You stayed with Mr. Ashford for 2 years, Hale said. If he was as controlling as you claim, why didn't you leave sooner? Because he made me believe I couldn't, that I needed him, that no one else would understand, and it took me 2 years to realize that was a lie. And yet, you never filed a police report until after you'd already left. Doesn't that seem convenient? Ivy's jaw tightened. I didn't file a report because I didn't think anyone would believe me. Because people like you would ask questions like that and make it seem like it was my fault for staying. Hale opened his mouth to respond, but Judge Torres held up a hand. Mr. Hale, I think we've established Ms. Carter's reasons for her actions. Move on. Hale's expression flickered with frustration, but he nodded. No further questions. Ivy stepped down, her legs barely holding her, and returned to her seat. Lucas reached forward from the row behind her and squeezed her shoulder. She didn't turn around, but she felt it, steady, grounding. Then it was Damien's turn. He took the stand with the same calm confidence he'd had throughout the entire process. Hale guided him through a carefully constructed narrative, one where he was the victim, where Ivy had overreacted, where everything he'd done had been misunderstood. I never meant to hurt her, Damien said, his voice smooth and sincere. I cared about Ivy. I still do. I just wanted to make sure she was okay. I know I made mistakes, but I never intended to scare her. Ivy felt her stomach turn. He sounded so reasonable, so genuine, and for a second she wondered if anyone in the room could see through it. Then Karen stood for cross-examination. Mr. Ashford, you say you cared about Miss Carter. Is that why you destroyed all of her belongings after she left? Damien hesitated just for a second. I was angry. I didn't handle it well. And the text message you sent her from a different number after the restraining order was issued, was that also because you cared? I just wanted to talk to her. I didn't think it would be a problem. Even though the restraining order explicitly stated you were to have no contact? Damien faltered. I didn't think one message would matter. Karen stepped closer. And showing up at her residence? Climbing onto the fire escape and knocking on the window? Was that also just wanting to talk? I was worried about her. And going to the school where Emma attends? Attempting to pick her up without permission? How does that fit into your concern for Ms. Carter? Damien's calm facade was cracking now. I wasn't trying to take the child. I was trying to get a message to Ivy. By using a 6-year-old as a pawn. That's not... Yes or no, Mr. Ashford. Did you attempt to pick up Emma from school? Damien's jaw tightened. I went to the school, yes, but I wasn't trying to... Yes or no? Yes. Karen let the silence hang for a moment, then turned to the judge. No further questions, Your Honor. Damien stepped down and Ivy could see the anger simmering beneath his surface. He sat down next to Hale, his hands clenched on the table, and didn't look at anyone. The judge spent several minutes reviewing her notes, flipping through pages, her expression unreadable. The courtroom was so quiet Ivy could hear her own heartbeat. She glanced back at Lucas, who gave her a small nod of encouragement. Finally, Judge Torres looked up. I've reviewed all the evidence presented today, as well as the record from the previous hearings. Mr. Ashford, I want to be very clear about something. The court does not take restraining orders lightly. They exist to protect people from harm, physical, emotional, and psychological. And the evidence in this case demonstrates a clear pattern of behavior that goes far beyond concern or miscommunication. Damien's lawyer shifted in his seat, but the judge continued. You've repeatedly violated the terms of the restraining order. You've engaged in behavior that is at best harassing and at worst predatory. You attempted to gain access to a minor child who is not your own under false pretenses. You've shown that you will not respect boundaries, even when those boundaries are legally mandated. This court takes these violations seriously. Hale started to stand, but the judge held up a hand. I'm granting a permanent restraining order. Mr. Ashford, you are to have no contact with Miss Carter or any member of her household, including Emma Hale. You are to stay at least 500 feet away from her residence, her workplace, and any location she frequents. This includes her place of employment, which is now on record with this court. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest and criminal charges. Do you understand? Damien's face went pale. Your Honor, do you understand? He swallowed hard. Yes. Furthermore, I'm ordering you to complete a court-mandated program on domestic violence and coercive control. You will provide proof of completion to this court within 6 months. Failure to do so will result in additional penalties. And Mr. Ashford, if you appear before me again for violating this order, you will go to jail. That is not a threat. That is a promise. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that echoed through the courtroom. Ivy felt the weight lift off her chest all at once. She sagged in her chair, and Karen put a hand on her shoulder. You did it, Karen said quietly. It's over. Ivy nodded, but she couldn't speak, couldn't process what had just happened, the finality of it, the permanence. Lucas was there a second later, helping her to her feet. Damien was still sitting at the defense table, staring at nothing, his lawyer murmuring something in his ear. Ivy didn't look at him, didn't give him the satisfaction. She walked out of the courtroom with her head up, Lucas beside her, and didn't look back. Outside, the air was cold and sharp, and Ivy stood on the courthouse steps, letting it fill her lungs. Karen joined them a moment later, her leather bag slung over one shoulder. I'll file the final paperwork this afternoon, she said. You'll get copies of everything. And Ivy, if he contacts you again even once, you call me immediately. Don't wait. Don't second-guess yourself. Just call. I will. Karen smiled, and for the first time since Ivy had met her, she looked genuinely warm. You did good in there. You were strong, you were clear, and you didn't let them shake you. I'm proud of you. Ivy felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you for everything. That's what I'm here for. Karen squeezed her arm, then nodded to Lucas. Take care of her. I will. Karen walked away, and Ivy and Lucas stood there for a long moment, neither of them saying anything. Then Ivy started crying. Not quiet tears, full, body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep and raw. Lucas pulled her into his arms, and she let herself fall apart, right there on the steps, not caring who saw. It's over, she said between sobs. It's really over. Yeah, Lucas said, his voice rough. It is. They stood there until Ivy had cried herself out, until the tears stopped, and all that was left was exhaustion. Then they got in the car and drove home. Emma was waiting for them when they got back, sitting at the kitchen table with Mrs. Alvarez, coloring a picture of what looked like a castle surrounded by dinosaurs. She looked up when they walked in, her face lighting up. Did you win? Lucas smiled, his hand resting on Ivy's back. Yeah, Bug. We won. Emma grinned and went back to her coloring like it was just another day. And maybe for her, it was. Mrs. Alvarez stood, gathering her things, and squeezed Ivy's hand on her way out. I'm proud of you, she said quietly. Ivy nodded, her throat tight, and watched her go. That night, after Emma had gone to bed, Ivy sat on the couch with Lucas, the apartment quiet around them. She felt wrung out, like every emotion she'd been holding onto for months had finally been released. But underneath the exhaustion was something else, something lighter. What happens now? She asked. Lucas looked at her. What do you want to happen? Ivy thought about it. I want to rebuild. I want to figure out who I am without him. I want to stop being afraid. You will. How do you know? Because you already started. Ivy looked at him, and something shifted in the space between them. Something that had been building for weeks, but neither of them had named. Lucas? I know, he said quietly. I feel it too. I don't know if I'm ready. That's okay. We don't have to figure it out tonight. Ivy nodded, and they sat there in the quiet, just existing in the same space, and it was enough. The weeks that followed were different, lighter. Ivy started her job at the nonprofit, and she was good at it, better than she'd expected. She helped other people navigate the same system she'd just survived, and there was something deeply satisfying about turning her experience into something useful. She worked with women who were still trapped, who called late at night from locked bathrooms, whispering into their phones. She walked them through the steps she'd taken, reminded them they weren't crazy, that they deserved better. And every time she helped someone take that first step toward leaving, she felt a little more whole. One afternoon, about a month after the final hearing, a young woman named Sarah came into the office. She was 23 with dark circles under her eyes and a way of holding herself that Ivy recognized immediately. They sat in one of the small consultation rooms, and Sarah told her story in fits and starts, apologizing every few minutes for wasting Ivy's time. You're not wasting my time, Ivy said. I promise.
But I don't know if it's bad enough. Like, he doesn't hit me or anything. He makes me feel like I'm losing my mind. Ivy leaned forward. That's exactly what it is. You're not losing your mind. He's making you doubt yourself on purpose. That's how it works. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. I thought I was just being too sensitive. You're not. And you don't have to wait until it gets worse to leave. You can leave now.
Sarah nodded, wiping her eyes. How did you do it? How did you actually leave? Ivy thought about that night, sitting on the curb, making the call, not knowing if Lucas would answer. I called someone I trusted, someone I knew wouldn't judge me, and I let them help me. What if I don't have anyone like that? Then you call us. That's what we're here for. By the time Sarah left, she had a safety plan, a list of resources, and Ivy's direct number. She looked a little less scared than when she'd walked in, and Ivy felt like maybe, just maybe, she was doing something that mattered. She found an apartment, a small one-bedroom on the other side of town, close enough to Lucas's place that Emma could visit, but far enough that Ivy felt like she had her own space. It wasn't much, just a basic unit in an older building, but it was hers. The first place she'd lived alone in years. Lucas helped her move in on a Saturday morning, hauling boxes up 3 flights of stairs while Emma supervised from the doorway, offering commentary on his technique. You're supposed to lift with your legs, Daddy. I am lifting with my legs. It doesn't look like it. Lucas set down a box and put his hands on his hips, breathing hard. You want to try? Emma considered this seriously, then shook her head. No, I'm the supervisor. Ivy laughed, and it felt good. Easy, like something she used to do all the time and was finally remembering how. They spent the afternoon unpacking, arranging furniture, arguing good-naturedly about whether the couch should go against the wall or under the window. Emma insisted on bringing Mr. Chomps to protect the new place from bad guys. He's very good at his job, Emma said seriously, setting the stuffed dinosaur on Ivy's couch. Ivy smiled. I can see that. I feel safer already. By evening, the apartment was starting to look like a home. Not perfect. There were still boxes stacked in the bedroom, and the kitchen was barely functional, but it was hers. When Lucas and Emma finally left, Ivy stood in the middle of her living room, looking around, and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Pride. She'd done this. She'd left, she'd fought, and she'd won. And now she had a place of her own, a job she cared about, and people who cared about her. Life settled into a rhythm. Ivy worked, spent time with Lucas and Emma, and slowly started reconnecting with the friends she'd lost. Some of them didn't understand why she'd stayed so long, but others did. And those were the ones she kept. Her friend Melissa, someone she'd known since college and had slowly drifted away from during the Damien years, met her for coffee one afternoon. They sat outside a cafe downtown, and Melissa didn't ask questions. She just listened as Ivy talked, filling in the gaps of the last 2 years. I'm sorry I wasn't there, Melissa said when Ivy finished. You didn't know. I should have. I should have noticed you were pulling away. Ivy shook her head. He was good at making it look natural, like I was just busy, or we were growing apart. That's how it works. Melissa reached across the table and took her hand. Well, I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere. Ivy squeezed her hand back, feeling another piece of herself click into place. She started therapy, which was harder than she'd expected. Talking about Damien, about the years she'd spent under his control, about the person she'd been before, and the person she was trying to become. It felt like peeling back layers of scar tissue. But her therapist, a woman named Dr. Patel, who had kind eyes and didn't bullshit, was patient. You're going to have setbacks, Dr. Patel said during one session. Days when you feel like you're back at square one. That's normal. Healing isn't linear. When does it get easier? It already is easier. You just can't see it yet because you're in the middle of it. But trust me, 6 months ago, could you have imagined being where you are now? Ivy thought about it. 6 months ago, she'd been sitting on that curb, terrified and alone. And now she had an apartment, a job, people who loved her. No, she said. I couldn't have. Exactly. So give yourself credit for that. One Saturday afternoon, about 2 months after the final hearing, Ivy was at Lucas's apartment, helping Emma with a school project about family. Emma had drawn a picture of the 3 of them, Lucas, Ivy, and herself, standing in front of a house with a purple sun overhead and Mr. Chomp standing guard. Is this okay? Emma asked, holding up the drawing. Ivy looked at it, her chest tight. It's perfect. Lucas came over, drying his hands on a dish towel, and looked at the drawing. That's us? Emma nodded. Yep, our family. Lucas glanced at Ivy, and she saw the question in his eyes. She smiled, just a little, and nodded. Yeah, Lucas said, ruffling Emma's hair. That's us. Later, after Emma had gone to play in her room, Lucas and Ivy sat at the kitchen table with coffee. The afternoon light slanted through the window, warm and golden, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful. She thinks of you as family, Lucas said. I know. Does that bother you? Ivy thought about it. No, it doesn't. Lucas reached across the table and took her hand. Good, because I think of you that way too. Ivy felt her throat tighten. Lucas, I don't want to mess this up. I don't want to hurt you or Emma if I'm not ready. Then we'll take it slow as you need, but I'm not going anywhere. Ivy looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in a long time, she let herself believe it. Believe that this could work, that she could have this. Okay, she said. Slow. Lucas smiled. Slow. They sat there, hands linked across the table, and Ivy felt something settle in her chest. Not fear, not uncertainty, just peace. 3 months later, Ivy got a call from Karen. Damien had completed the court-mandated program and submitted his proof of completion. He'd also moved out of state, to Arizona according to the forwarding address on file. He's gone, Karen said, and as long as he stays gone, you're free. Ivy sat on her couch, phone pressed to her ear, and let that sink in. Free. She'd won. Not just the court case, but her life back. Thank you, she said, for everything. You did the hard part. I just helped with the paperwork. After they hung up, Ivy sat there for a long time, staring at nothing. Then she called Lucas. He's gone, she said when he answered. He moved to Arizona. Good. He should have left a long time ago. Yeah. Ivy paused. I feel weird about it, like I should be celebrating, but I'm just tired. That's normal. You've been carrying this for months. Now you can finally put it down. Ivy thought about that. Yeah, I guess I can. That night she went to Lucas's place for dinner. Emma had made spaghetti, or at least had helped Lucas make it, which meant there was sauce on the counter and noodles stuck to the ceiling. They ate together, laughing at Emma's stories about school, and for the first time Ivy felt like she belonged there. Not as a guest, not as someone who was just passing through, but as part of something real. After Emma went to bed, Lucas and Ivy sat on the couch, close but not touching, the TV playing something neither of them was watching. Can I ask you something? Ivy said. Always. Do you ever regret it? Answering that call? Lucas looked at her, his expression serious. Not once. Even when it got complicated? Especially then. He reached over and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. You're worth it, Ivy. All of it. Ivy felt tears prick her eyes, but they were the good kind. The kind that came from being seen, really seen, and not found wanting. I love you, she said quietly. Lucas smiled. I love you too. They sat there in the quiet, surrounded by the remnants of dinner and the sounds of the city outside, and Ivy realized something she'd been too afraid to admit before. She was happy, not in a perfect, tied up with a bow kind of way, but in the messy, complicated, real kind of way. The kind that came from surviving something hard and coming out the other side stronger. She thought about this woman who'd sat on that curb outside Damien's house, shaking and afraid, convinced she had nowhere else to go. And she wished she could go back and tell her that it would be okay, that she'd find her way, that there were people who would help her, who would stand by her, who would remind her that she was worth fighting for. But she couldn't go back. She could only go forward, and that was enough. 6 months later, Ivy stood in her apartment, packing boxes again. But this time, it wasn't because she was running. It was because she was moving forward. She'd found a bigger place, one with a spare bedroom for when Emma stayed over, and a small office where she could work on the advocacy writing she'd started doing on the side. Lucas arrived with Emma in tow, both of them ready to help. Emma immediately appointed herself supervisor again, which made Lucas roll his eyes and Ivy laugh. You know, one of these days, you're going to have to actually help instead of just telling us what to do, Lucas said. Emma considered this. Maybe when I'm taller. They spent the day moving boxes, assembling furniture, and ordering pizza when they got too tired to cook. By evening, the new apartment was starting to take shape, and Ivy felt that same sense of pride she'd felt the first time. But this time, it was stronger. Because this wasn't just about having her own space. It was about building a life she actually wanted to live. That night, after Emma had fallen asleep on the couch, Ivy and Lucas sat on the floor surrounded by boxes, eating leftover pizza and talking about nothing in particular. "Can I tell you something?" Ivy said. "Always. A year ago, I didn't think I'd make it. I thought I was too broken, that I'd messed up too badly, that I'd never be able to fix any of it." Lucas set down his pizza and looked at her. "And now? Now I know that wasn't true. I wasn't broken. I was just stuck. And all I needed was someone to help me get unstuck. You did most of it yourself." "Maybe, but I couldn't have done it alone." Lucas reached over and took her hand. "You don't have to do anything alone anymore. You know that, right?" Ivy nodded, feeling the tears come again. "Yeah, I know." They sat there in this quiet, and Ivy thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The fear, the fighting, the slow, painful work of putting herself back together. And she realized something important. She'd spent so long thinking that leaving Damien was the end of her story, the big climactic moment where everything got resolved. But it wasn't. Leaving was just the beginning. The real work, the rebuilding, the healing, the learning how to trust again, that was what came after. And it was hard. Some days it was really hard. There were moments when she still woke up afraid, when she checked the locks twice before bed, when she heard a voice that sounded like Damien's and felt her chest tighten. But those moments were getting fewer. And the good moments, the ones where she laughed without thinking, where she made plans for the future, where she felt safe and loved and seen, those were getting more. Years later, when people asked Ivy how she'd done it, how she'd found the courage to leave, she'd tell them the truth, that it wasn't courage. Not at first, anyway. It was desperation. It was sitting on a curb at midnight with nowhere to go and deciding that even the unknown was better than staying. But the courage came later. It came in showing up to court when she wanted to run. It came in telling her story when she wanted to stay silent. It came in believing that she deserved better, even when a voice in her head, one that sounded a lot like Damien, told her she didn't. And it came in letting people help her. And accepting that needing help wasn't weakness, that asking for it was actually one of the bravest things she'd ever done. She'd learned something important through all of this, something she wished she'd known years ago. That love, real love, doesn't make you smaller. It doesn't cut you off from the world or convince you that you're nothing without it. Real love makes space for you. It supports you. It reminds you of who you are when you forget. And that's what Lucas had done. He'd shown up when she needed him, not because he wanted something from her, but because it was the right thing to do. He'd given her space to heal, time to figure herself out, and patience when she stumbled. He'd reminded her that she was worth it. Emma was 8 now, and sometimes Ivy watched her and marveled at how much she'd grown. She was smart and funny and fiercely independent, and Ivy hoped that she'd never let anyone make her feel small, that she'd never doubt her worth or stay somewhere that hurt her. And if she ever did, Ivy would be there, to remind her that she deserved better, to help her find her way out, to show up at midnight if that's what it took, because that's what love is. Not grand gestures or perfect moments, just showing up over and over again, until the person you're showing up for remembers how to show up for themselves. On a quiet Sunday morning, almost 2 years after that midnight phone call, Ivy woke up in her apartment to sunlight streaming through the windows. She made coffee, sat on her couch, and looked around at the life she'd built. There were photos on the walls. Her and Lucas and Emma at the park, her and Melissa at a concert, her with the team from the nonprofit. There were books on the shelves, plants on the windowsill, art that Emma had made hanging on the fridge. It wasn't perfect. Some days were still hard. Some nights she still had nightmares. But it was hers. And that made all the difference. Her phone buzzed, and she smiled when she saw Lucas's name. "Emma wants to know if you're coming over for pancakes. Tell her I'll be there in 20 minutes. She says to bring Mr. Chomps. Apparently, there's a monster situation that needs handling." Ivy laughed, grabbed the stuffed dinosaur from her couch, and headed out the door. Because this was her life now. Pancakes and monsters and people who loved her. Messy and imperfect and real. And it was everything she'd fought for. If there's one thing Ivy wanted people to understand, it's this. Leaving is hard. Rebuilding is harder. But staying in a place that destroys you is hardest of all. And you don't have to be perfect to deserve better. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to be strong every single day. You just have to take one step, make one call, ask for help. Because on the other side of that fear, on the other side of that doubt, there's a life waiting. One where you're not just surviving, one where you're actually living. And that life is worth fighting for. Ivy knew that now, and she carried it with her every single day, in the work she did, in the relationships she built, in the quiet moments when she looked around and realized she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She'd survived, she'd healed, and she'd found something she'd thought was lost forever, herself. And that was the greatest victory of all.